Hello and welcome back for my final pre-debate election prediction. So as we all know, the debate is happening later today. And before that, I'm going to say who I think will win the debate and who I think will win the election before the debate happens. After the debate, I'll do an updated prediction, but this is my final prediction before the debate. And if you want more of these videos, make sure to like and subscribe. And I just realized that only 4% of you are subscribed, so if you want to join the 4%, then make sure to subscribe today. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. And today I have with me a former intern for Beto O'Rourke's presidential and gubernatorial campaigns, and he has some news that will probably shock you. So introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Dave. I've worked with Beto's gubernatorial campaign and presidential primary campaign. And in both campaigns, I've actually worked with Beto himself on issues such as gun rights and open borders. And as a matter of fact, I've also worked with the campaign in analyzing polling, so I am glad to be here.
Thanks for introducing yourself, Dave. And without further ado, let's continue this prediction. And I'd like to do this prediction with another perspective in mind. So that's part of the reason why I invited Dave to join us here today. But anyway, now that we go to the prediction, I think Dave and I both agree that some states, it's not really questionable who they'll go to, with some states solidly going to Harris and other states solidly going to Trump. But before we continue with that, we have to analyze some recent trends that have been happening. In terms of the popular vote, Kamala Harris really was losing to Donald Trump when she first was introduced to the race. Then she started defeating Donald Trump, and Donald Trump really hit a low point at about 46%. But ever since RFK Jr. dropped out, Donald Trump has been gaining in the polls, and Harris kind of has been sliding, with Donald Trump now just a percentage point behind Harris in the popular vote. So with that in mind, it does seem like Trump is gaining ground on Harris, and in terms of the Electoral College, it seems like Trump also maintains a lead. As most betting markets do have Donald Trump in the lead, with him particularly leading in terms of electionbettingodds.com, 287 to 251, and no, we're not sponsored, but he is leading according to this one website, and according to RCP, he's leading in terms of the betting averages. And I'll have Dave explain this phenomenon.
All right. So, in my time working on Beto's campaign, we've actually always encountered these issues with this charisma, this kind of trajectory that most Democratic campaigns go. There's a lot of hype at first, especially with the youth, but eventually, like any trend on Instagram, like any trend on TikTok, it wears down. And you kind of see here, the Harris campaign is starting to wear down on its hype. Now, the real question for the Harris campaign, similar to my time on Beto's presidential primary campaign, is that can she translate that hype back into polling, back into numbers, back into statistics? Or is she going to face the same issue as Beto's gubernatorial and presidential primary campaign? Now, enough with Beto's campaign and Harris's campaign, but we do see a lot of parallels here. Now, we see in the new New York Times Siena College poll that Trump is now leading by 1%. Now, it does come as a scare to a lot of Harris pollsters, to a lot of Harris campaign grassroots activists. And a real issue with the Harris campaign, actually, is that she isn't going far enough on the grassroots level.
All right, thank you for that. And that was a very great analysis, especially of this new New York Times poll that actually does have Trump in the lead. To the surprise of many, it led to Trump having a big boost in the betting markets in particular, because not just is this a lead, it's a lead in a popular vote, which Republicans have struggled in recently. Republicans typically do far better in the Electoral College than the popular vote. And if Trump wins the popular vote, he is almost certainly winning this election as a whole. But regardless, we'll continue by marking the safe states for both candidates, and you'll see that Trump will have some states of his own. After seeing these new polls, this new data, some of these safe states for Donald Trump will be states that we didn't even consider safe for him in the past. In fact, Trump picks up Montana, which we knew would go to him, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Alaska, which back in 2020 wasn't seen as necessarily safe, but did go to Trump by over 10 points. He also picks up North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. Nebraska's first, Nebraska's third, Kansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, which was another state that wasn't seen as safe, but Trump still won by significant margins. Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, West Virginia, Ohio. He's not going to win that by over like 15%, but he'll win it nonetheless, especially since his VP pick, JD Vance, is from Ohio. And this is pretty much it for Donald Trump's safe states. But in terms of states that we know will go to Trump, but not by safe margins, we can also classify Texas, the home state of Beto O'Rourke, actually, and Florida as going to Donald Trump. Florida will be slightly closer than Texas. We've seen this trend in the past, and it will be no different in 2024. And since you're actually from Texas, Dave, can you give us a little synopsis of how Texan voters are going right now, especially since you worked on Beto O'Rourke's campaign?
No, thank you, Mr. EC. The issue with the Democratic Party in Texas and the issue with Harris is that most Latino voters are shifting to the right. Now, we do see that in recent elections, such as the 2022 gubernatorial election, which working on Beto's campaign was a huge issue for us, as most of these Latino voters do see the border as a huge issue. And the reason why is because they see more opportunities here, and these voters are shifting to the Republican Party mainly on issues agreeing with Trump on the economy, education, cultural values, and even immigration. The Democratic Party is bleeding this support very quickly because while they might not be necessarily the quote-unquote party of open borders, they have stayed silent on the issue. And in fact, I also see the Democratic Party losing Arizona later on, but that's just my opinion on this. Now, on a more macro scale, Hispanic Americans have increasingly voted for the Republican Party in recent years. In 2020, Trump saw his share of Hispanic votes rise up to 38%, up from 28% in 2016. And there's also been a shift among Catholics. And the big mistake, as someone who worked on Beto O'Rourke's campaigns here, is that the Democratic Party have not attempted to make inroads with the Hispanic community. These communities support more conservative values, more conservative principles. While they might not say they're conservative necessarily, their traditions and their values are, coming as someone from a more Catholic background, for example. And so most of them, especially in South Texas, are breaking with the Democratic Party on social issues, the economy, and immigration.
Thank you for that thoughtful insight, Dave. And with that in mind, that's why Texas and Florida even are the way they are in this political landscape, especially in 2024, even when they might not have been this much for Trump in 2020 or even 2016. But without further ado, we would be naive to say that Harris doesn't have safe states of her own, because she does. With one being Washington, another being Oregon and California and Hawaii on the West Coast. She also gets Colorado and New Mexico by lesser margins. She gets Illinois, New York, Vermont, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, DC, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, as well as Maine's 1st District. Harris also wins Walz' home state of Minnesota by a pretty decent margin, similar to Trump's margin in Ohio. And now, after the safe and pretty safe states are tallied up, Harris is trailing Trump by 12 electoral votes, more than the entire electoral vote count of Wisconsin, so this is pretty significant. To expand on Trump's lead, Trump actually picks up some more states in this upcoming election. In this election, he's primarily focusing his efforts on Pennsylvania and Georgia. Because if he wins North Carolina, which is a state that he won in 2016, as well as 2020, then he pretty much wins this election if he just wins those two states. Because look at this map. If Harris wins every other state on the map, and let's say Trump wins Maine's 2nd, because he probably will, and Trump just picks up Georgia and Pennsylvania, he wins this election by 2 electoral votes. So we see a lot of Trump's campaign is focusing on just these 2 states. And now I'm going to talk about North Carolina, because North Carolina is the key to the Pennsylvania and Georgia strategy. And even though Trump currently kind of sees North Carolina as a given, it's a lot closer than many would expect. At pretty much the height of his unpopularity back in 2020, he won North Carolina, even though he lost many other swing states, including Arizona and Georgia, in a shock turn of events. He also won North Carolina in 2016, despite Obama winning North Carolina back in 2008. But even still, North Carolina is very, very close in this election, even though Trump has done well in the state in the past. If we go to the betting odds, North Carolina is given about a 62% chance of going to Donald Trump. So Trump's plan relying on North Carolina may be a little bit of a stretch because North Carolina is not a given whatsoever. Also, Maine's first goes to Harris. But North Carolina is not a given whatsoever for Donald Trump, but he's still likely to win in the state. With that in mind, he is also likely to win in Georgia. We mentioned the demographic trends in Georgia are shifting towards Trump's favor as he's able to do better with minority voters. We've seen this in Texas. We've seen this in Florida. We'll likely see it in North Carolina as well, and we'll also see it in Georgia. And furthermore, later we're going to cover Arizona, and we see it there as well. So this is extremely important. Getting the minority vote is very, very important, especially for Republicans, as they've often failed to get much of the minority vote in the past. But now it seems like Trump has an opening with not just white voters, but voters of pretty much every demographic in the country. So we can see that Trump actually has a chance at Georgia, as he did back in 2016 when he won by over 5 points. And in 2020, he barely lost to Biden. But it seems like his chance in Georgia is way higher than it was in 2020. And it might even be similar to how it was in 2016. Polling agrees with this, with Trump leading by an average of about 2 percentage points, and that's including RFK Jr. And if we see the betting odds, Trump is leading in Georgia with about a 60% chance to pick up the state. In polls in Georgia, Trump is currently leading by about a half a percentage point. But in the recent polls, Trump is leading by as much as +4. With Harris leading in polls from maybe a few weeks ago, but Trump leading in the polls that are from just 1 week ago or a few days ago. And Georgia seems to be a state that will go in his column. Trump needs just 20 electoral votes to win, now 19, but Harris will get some states of her own to bring herself in the contention to win this election. With 2 of the states being Maine and New Hampshire, these states are Northeast staples, and we don't expect them to change hands in this election. They didn't even change hands in 2016 when they were expected to. According to some pundits, some thought that New Hampshire would go to Donald Trump, barely went to Clinton. But in 2020, New Hampshire went solidly to Biden, and so did Maine. This won't change in 2024, as both states will go to Harris in this upcoming election, putting 6 more electoral votes in her column. And Dave, if you have anything to comment on the Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. EC. The thing with the Northeast is that most down ballot Republicans do fare better, much better, than the National Republican Party. Now, we see this in Vermont with Governor Phil Scott being a Republican. We see this in Maine with Senator Susan Collins being a Republican. But, notice how Vermont is solid blue and Maine leaning blue. Back to you, Mr. EC.
Alright, so now that that's covered, we'll go to our next state, which is Virginia. While not quite in the Northeast, it's on the East Coast. And it's one of the few southern states, if the only southern state, that will likely go to Harris in this election. In fact, Virginia has a trend of going to Democrats, but I've told you about that time and time again. What you need to hear is something different. So what's different about this election is that Virginia is actually in contention for Republicans. It hasn't been in contention for Republicans since about 2004, when it had actually a 14-point shift to the left, going to Obama by +6. In this election, it might have a similar shift, but to the right this time, going to Donald Trump. However, I don't think that shift is feasible, considering Virginian voters will vote Democrat on Senate elections. The governor election this time was an anomaly. But in terms of Senate elections, which usually are better indicators of national elections, Virginia will go to the Democrats. It has happened in the past and will likely also happen in the present, with Virginia going to Kamala Harris, bringing herself to 225 electoral votes. Now, Harris has focused her campaign on the Midwest, while Trump has focused on Pennsylvania and Georgia. Harris is focusing on the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania as well, but mostly Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota. We see that she has Minnesota. She passed up on Josh Shapiro for governor in Pennsylvania in favor of Tim Walz winning Minnesota, and Tim Walz may have a little bit of an effect on Wisconsin as well, putting Wisconsin in that blue column. In terms of polling, this has been seen with Wisconsin going to Harris by about +3 in a recent poll. So Wisconsin does go to the blue column, bringing Harris to 235 electoral votes. And it'll likely be closer than Minnesota and maybe even closer than Virginia and in the tilt column. Betting markets support this with it going to Harris with about 56% certainty. Now we go to Michigan, where one key issue has been the conflict in Gaza. And this is one of the reasons that I think that many will consider the debate to be closer but have a larger negative impact on Harris. Because everyone knows Donald Trump, everyone knows how he is. Some people don't like him, some people love him. And really, the opinions of him won't change unless he has an absolutely horrible debate performance or an absolutely great one. On the other hand, people haven't really formed their opinions on Harris just yet. Yes, she's trendy. Yes, she's got a lot of hype, as Dave was saying earlier. But people's opinions are not really cemented in terms of Harris just yet. So she can really change people's minds in this debate. So people are either going to say she had a great performance or she had an abysmal performance akin to her performance back in the 2020 primary, and there's really no in between. And I do lean on the side that she'll have a pretty bad performance because her interview that she had earlier, she was given a lot of softball questions. So it wasn't really representative of how she'll perform on her own, especially at the stage of a debate. She did do well, according to many, against Mike Pence in the vice presidential debate. But later today, my prediction is that Donald Trump will win the debate against Kamala Harris, but we'll just have to see. But I'm kind of veering off the issue here, which is the state of Michigan and where Michigan will vote. So I do think Michigan will go to Kamala Harris, but pretty narrowly. We see she's lost about 4% in terms of the betting averages in just the past week alone. That's like 0.5% a day. And in terms of polling in Michigan, she's leading within the margin of error with most polls. While she will narrowly win in Michigan, I do see a scenario where Donald Trump wins the state. So now he currently leads by +1, but that lead does evaporate after factoring in Nebraska's second. So with 3 states left, only one of them really matters in quotes, air quotes, because it would bring either candidate over the line, but the other 2 states still matter in case there's a different map. And I'll have Dave explain a little bit of the West Coast politics and why we think that Nevada and Arizona will go the way that they will go. And you'll see where they'll go in just a bit.
Thank you, Mr. EC. Now, we see that in Nevada, the Vegas unions, especially the service unions at the casinos, do have a strong impact on turning out to vote. And so, I can confidently say that Nevada will tilt blue for Harris. Arizona is a border state to Mexico, and I can confidently say that it will tilt red for Donald Trump.
So now that really didn't change much, but still we see that Trump is leading by 5 going into Pennsylvania. So maybe if one state is different, let's say Wisconsin is different. Trump has already won this election without needing to win Pennsylvania. So that's why these 2 states are still important, even though it doesn't quite look like it at first glance. But in any case, we still need to cover Pennsylvania, as that will decide in this election who will win according to this current map. While Pennsylvania at one point was going to Harris, it was in Harris's favor. Now, on the other hand, aside from one poll from the Morning Consult, Donald Trump is leading in almost every poll, with the rest being a toss-up. And we've also seen a flip in the betting markets, where it's now going to Donald Trump with about 55% certainty. But honestly, that's like weather forecasting. We're just going to go off what we know at this current moment. And what we know is Pennsylvania will likely tilt towards Donald Trump. Still, he'll win the state, winning 281 to 257 against Kamala Harris. One issue that's big in Pennsylvania is that of fracking, and Trump more so resonates with what people see as the average person, average voter. Harris has tried to shift her stance a little bit, but she's still not really resonating with the rural communities in Pennsylvania. So if Trump is able to galvanize any semblance of support in Philadelphia, if he's able to beat like his 10% that he got last election, then he will almost certainly win the state as a whole. It's just basically a rural versus urban turnout that's going to decide this election, whether Trump can galvanize voters in urban areas or Harris can galvanize voters in rural areas. Seems like Trump may have the upper hand, and at this current moment, Trump will likely win the election. But stay tuned for the post debate prediction and let us know if you think that Dave was a good addition today, and he might appear in future videos. And thank you for watching.